think you should be on TV presenting if you ever want to leave HR. But thank you for that lovely introduction. Yes, hello everybody, and thank you for joining us for this next session, which is about remote working, the new nirvana. I guess I've got lots of opinions on that, but we're actually joined by Gerri Clement. Gerri was joined the Cabinet Office in 2018, and she led the cross-government resourcing hub during preparations for a no-deal Brexit, another thing that I'd slightly forgotten about during this coronavirus crisis. But she's now the programme director for Shaping Our Future, which is the civil service HR locations programme. She describes herself as a tempered radical, and she focuses on change programmes with a strong people focus. So everyone say hello to Gerri. She's going to explore if remote working genuinely is the new nirvana. As before, please put questions in the chat box and we'll try and revisit those at the end of the session. Thank you. Hello, Gerri.
Hi, thank you, Stacey. And thank you, everyone. Just to say that I've had to dial in using our browser because we have particular quirks in Cabinet Office IT. So I won't be able to see everybody, but hopefully you can see me. So thanks for the introduction. My programme for Cabinet Office CSHR locations was called Shaping Our Future. But the Shaping Our Future name has been overtaken by a much bigger civil service modernisation and reform programme. So my one is now at the moment just called Civil Service HR Locations. But I'm really quite excited about being here. So thank you for having me. Just a little bit about me. I've got this very strong sense of place. So I'm really interested in speaking with people across the country, because one of my drivers is on social mobility. And place has a real broad impact on whether you can move up, if we use simplistic terms for social mobility or not. And it's not necessarily about a particular place. It can be people co-located in places, but it really drives me. So if anybody is interested in the social mobility side, I'm very happy to speak about that. But that was one of the reasons why I wanted to do the locations work, and about why we work in an office and where we work in an office. So I'm really pleased to be speaking. So thinking about why do we go into an office traditionally? Well, it helps us to create a sense of purpose, doesn't it? It helps line managers to be able to manage their staff because they'll be able to see them, they'll be able to interact with them. It will help with productivity. It also helps to build a culture of an organisation. Culture is created through people in a large part, and it helps us to build those office relationships, to help us to develop our own social cohesion so that we feel that we're treated fairly in the workplace. And of course, it is very activity based. That's why we go in. But of course, during this extraordinary period in history, the civil service has had to do things differently. And I caveat this by saying that not all work can be conducted remotely, of course, because we've got the service industry, we've got people who work in courts or in prisons, we've got those who work on national security things, who have particular IT needs. And of course, we've got people that are carers. So that I recognise that not everyone can. But in the civil service, to a broader degree, we have moved to a more dispersed model. And we've had to mobilise rapidly using a broad group of departments, including our health and safety colleagues, those who are with responsibility for IT, technology, those who have caring well-being issues, our comms people. All of those have had to coalesce around really strong leadership and the messaging that really reinforces the zeitgeist about why we needed to work from home when we needed to work from home. The thing is, though, even though we've done that and we've managed an incredible amount of work, if you look at the plaudits that's gone to the Department for Work and Pensions on the work that they did on ramping up payments for universal credit, tremendous work's gone on, but there has been a cost at times. So what's been the cost? Well, there's varying evidence, but the ONS have said about well-being that loneliness is one of the key things that people have felt working remotely. In fact, those who have described themselves as often or always feeling lonely are 5 times more likely to report high anxiety than those who never feel lonely. And of course, being remote, you are by default alone or alone with your family. Engagement hasn't been quite as easy to do. While we have absolutely driven the need for teams to remain closely aligned, we've built up the Zoom access, all sorts of interoperability. So I'm joining this through Zoom, which didn't exist for me before lockdown. I can now access Teams, which also didn't exist for me. So it wasn't only just the IT, but also the communication about how you use it, etc. So all of those things have joined together. Performance. Now, performance management, we've still managed to do sort of line management and one-to-one conversations online. But I've had my staff tell me at times that they miss seeing people. So you can see us all through the screen, but actually seeing someone face to face is a very different experience. There's also been a view on how productive we are. Now, we have maintained our productivity, but there was a recognition that at times, because of the merging of our home life and our work life, it means that we've not been able to be necessarily as ruthless as we were in pre-COVID times about how we use our working time. The other things that we've had to think about in the civil service are those who need to be in the office for a different reason. So there are those who don't feel safe working from home. There absolutely was a commitment, and it's been maintained, that those who felt like that had a place in the office during the lockdown. And also there are those who are not physically able to work from home. It might be that they don't have sufficient space. Now, this has affected a couple of different working groups in my knowledge so far.
No,
there are those who have... There are those who have sometimes sort of done job sharing and flat sharing together, where they've just found that they don't have the physical space to be able to work from home. And there are those who come from circumstances where there just isn't space. So we've had to think about what are the demographics that have been impacted by having a distributed model. In the civil service, we've started to look at the evidence, how we build the evidence of what is going on. So in my team, we have done a couple of focus groups on how would people like to work in the future. Of these, a particular group of a younger demographic, so I'd say the under 35s, predominantly 70% of them, I think it was, wanted to move to a model where they worked 2 to 3 days in the office. But interestingly, a very small percentage, just 3%, didn't want to work from home at all, which is why we need to recognise that there's not a one-size-fits-all model. With another group that's had a more varied age group, I'd say that they ranged from 25 to about 60. There was still that evidence that the majority wanted to work from home 2 to 3 days a week. But it was slightly different. There were different concerns there. It was more about health concerns. But I accept that those are both quite small percentages and quite small models that we've been looking at. The demographics are insufficient for us to be able to extrapolate that. So what we have done in Civil Service HR is we've commissioned all of our HR professionals within the function to complete a working pattern preference exercise. Now, this exercise is primarily aimed at us reoccupying the office, because we want to support the Prime Minister with his drive to getting people back into the office, but of course doing that in a COVID secure way. But it would also inform how I might help the civil service HR of the future to be more distributed around the country, moving away from being London based and being based more likely in Manchester, Leeds, Sheffield, in a sort of a northern campus type. So this working pattern preference questionnaire is designed to help people to understand what would it be that works for them. What patterns would they like? Now, this is not creating an expectation that civil service HR would be able to meet those, but we would like to capture what people want. Because what we started to observe is that the working patterns have started to fit around both business and personal needs. So, for example, we might have a working parent that works during school hours and then logs on again either before the school time starts, before children are awake, or when they go to bed. And that has worked in a lot of cases. So we want to see what it is that we can capture that works well for both business and people. But what would we need to do differently? If we think about, all of us being in the office, having one-to-ones together, we have started to think about what we need to do differently. And to manage, I've found personally, to manage my staff through a laptop is a very different experience. I've started to recognise that I need different training in order to be able to do that. Also, the tools that we use in order to manage our work streams. How do I start to think about creating more of my work streams around outcomes rather than presenteeism? So those have been real drivers about the kind of things that we need to look at differently in order to have a degree of sustainability for it. So what are we aiming to maintain? We are aiming to maintain a hybrid approach. And the reason we're aiming to maintain that is because we can get the best out of both worlds. We can arrange for people to have a more sense of purpose if we create around a more of a people-centric approach. And what we will also strive to maintain is the leadership that we have. And with leadership, what we've noticed that we need to have a calmness and an optimism, which is a balance really between being realistic about what's happening in the short term and the now, but also confidence about what will happen in the medium term in the future. So more about how our leaders are confident with the uncertainty and the ambiguity that we're going through. So really, a degree of future work being remote is sustainable, but we are living in enforced conditions. So what we're experiencing now, we recognise we can't entirely extrapolate to the future, but there is evidence building on that hybrid model, which is beyond flexible working, because flexible working has legal connotations, and sometimes flexible working isn't particularly flexible, but more of a hybrid approach that allows us to maximise our greatest asset, which is our people.
Sorry, just unmuting. That was brilliant. Thank you, Gerri. Went by in a jiffy, didn't it?
It really did. So I can see some questions. Do you want me to go through those, Stacey?
Yeah, I was just going to read them out, but if you can see them, definitely go for it.
Okay. So Steve, you asked this question about, did I have clear end goal outcome in mind, or has the project evolved organically and adapted to the changing situation? Do you mean in terms of locations or with remote working? I'll come back. So I'll come back to your question, Steve.
Well, the project overall, just thinking you might have had some clear outcomes in mind or ideas of where you wanted to get to. Obviously, it's changed a bit, but did you expect it to sort of change anyway when with the outset? Forget about COVID for the moment, but did you anticipate that it might change? You might need to adapt some of your goals, some of your ambitions over time.
Yeah, so thanks for that, Steve. So interestingly, working closely with ministers, obviously I recognise that ministers are the ones that make decisions. So while there was an initial decision that we would be going to Manchester as where we held our golden plaque, where our HQ would be, as things evolved, ministers recognised that there was more that we could do to support the levelling up agenda. So it wasn't necessarily that the goals changed. There's still this drive to get people outside of London and the South East to support career building outside of areas that haven't been. But it's more about how we get there. So I described my project as based on Prince2 principles, but dealt with in an agile way. So I focus on what I need to get to, but I am not prescriptive about how I get there. Does that answer your question? Thank you. Okay, Frank, work is what you do, not where you go. Absolutely. We need to be careful that the current extreme working environment isn't seen as hybrid work. Yes, I totally agree. As I said, we are working under pressures that we wouldn't experience pre-COVID. So there is absolutely a recognition that we can't take everything, which is why we're doing constant pulse surveys, evaluation. We don't want to survey our people to death, but we do recognise we need to keep in touch to make sure we understand. What are our COVID-19 office staff limits compared to 100%? Well, this is an interesting one. Our estate staff are looking at a variety of things, because if you think about how many could go in your office, it would depend on how you can maintain social distancing. So if you are able to equip all of your offices with screens so that you are not physically close to people, apart from like with a border around you, you could be physically closer than if you maintained a 2-meter distance. So the answer is it depends. I would say broadly between 30 and 40%. That's just off the top of my head. I would say that's probably a safe staff limit that we've been working to. But I think some buildings have got slightly different arrangements than others. It also depends on, you know, how you can do your walk-through flows and your lift occupancy, all that sort of stuff. That sounded a bit woolly, but it's between 30 and 40, I would say. We've conducted that sounds really interesting, Diane. Our people are saying they miss their colleagues and the connections and the deliberate and coincidental contacts. Absolutely. The water cooler moments are really something that we recognise, which is why, you know, that hybrid model, getting people into the office, but why are they going into the office? You know, can we get that around people working in teams together? Do they need to actually sit at desks next to each other to be in the workplace, or do they need to go in with a sense of purpose? So that's something that we're also exploring. Are we thinking about new contracts for people? Not heard of any of that. I've seen it in the news for some organisations. I haven't heard anything like that, no. Caroline, instead of 20, okay. Do I think the drive for outcomes challenges most of those managers less confident in goal setting? Drive for outcomes challenges most of those managers less confident in coaching goal setting. That's a really interesting question, Neil. Whether there are managers less confident in coaching and goal setting that would be, you think that those managers that are less confident in that would want more presenteeism? Possibly. So what do I mean by different line manager skills? I suppose it's more about an emotional intelligence for me. It's about understanding what's going on in my members of staff's life that impact on whether they can have a meeting with me at 9:30 or whether actually the staggered school times mean that they need to be away from the computer for a longer period. Maybe that is something that we need to look at, coaching goal setting, whether that's one of the training initiatives that is needed. What are you thinking about doing to support more flexibility who have to be physically present? That is a very good question. I don't know the answer to that, Alison. What are we thinking of doing to support more flexibility for staff who have to be physically present to work? I don't know, but I will find that out and I will come back. I may not come back today, but I will come back on that. I'm just going to write that down. More flexibility for frontline
we've just got one last question here, and then if anyone else has got anything to add, we've just got 2 minutes left, so please try and get it in the chat box quickly, and we can come back to you after. Not. But the last one is, are you able to tell us a little bit more about your employee survey, example, the areas you focused on, and the mix of multi-choice and free format?
Yes, thanks Tracy for the question. So the working patterns kind of thing that we've looked at is how many days of the week would they want to come in the office, or conversely, how many days of a month would they want to come in the office, whether they would consider weekend working, whether there's a sort of a combo of the two, whether they want to be in an office or an office plus one or plus two different locations. We've asked the question around well-being. How do they feel about working from home? What's worked for them? What hasn't? We've also asked about things like if they're coming back into an office, what do they want to experience in an office? What kind of workspace do they want? And I don't mean in COVID secure ways. I mean, do they want to come back to meet for a particular purpose? Is it for something as simple as printing material off because we can't print anything that's officially sensitive from home? Is it about working together as a team? Is it about planning sessions, in which case they need a big table? What is it that they need to come into the office for? That's what we've asked for. We've also asked, the free format is more about, I suppose it's the qual type of evidence rather than the quant. So particularly on their well-being, what is it that they would want in an office that would make them feel happier about being there, safer about being there? It is to capture really the voice. So we've allowed quite a lot of discursive areas so that people feel a degree of ownership, a degree of feeling that they can have some control about what happens, because in any sort of volatile or change situation, the more control that someone would feel, the more likely they are able to access that change. If I'm able to share that with you, then I'm happy to do that.
Okay, brilliant. If everyone can put in the chat if you'd like to have that shared with you, or obviously we might be able to just send it to everyone or upload it to the virtual online event guide. So thank you, Gerri. That's perfectly brought us to a bang on time close. That was really, really useful. Thank you so much for giving up your time. I know you've been super busy. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to meet everyone. I'm going to stay on for a little while if that's okay.